So you were just waiting for our last few panel members to join us. So for those attending tonight, just bear with us for another minute or two, and we'll just wait to see if other panel members join us, and we'll start then. Thank you. Marina. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening and welcome to this webinar on the 10-year budget. We appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening and to hear more about the 10-year budget and to hopefully answer any questions you might have. I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. We have with us Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore from the Franklin Ward. We have Greg Sayers, Councillor for the Rodney Ward. We have Richard Hills, Councillor for the North Shore, and Chris Darby for the North Shore. We also have Angela Dalton, who's Councillor for Manurewa Papakura, and Christine Fletcher, who's Councillor for Albert Eden Puketāpapa. I'm expecting potentially a couple more councillors who may join us as the evening goes. Oh, yep, sorry, Councillor Pippa Coombe for the Waitemata and Gulf area. We also have local board chairs with us. We have Aidan Bennett from Devonport Takapuna Local Board. And we're expecting a few more local board chairs to join us as the evening goes on, and we'll introduce them a little bit later. We also have from the staff, we have Andrew Duncan, who's Manager for Financial Policy, Ross Tucker, who is the General Manager, Financial Strategy and Planning, Alec Tang, Chief Sustainability Officer, and Anna Jennings, who's the Lead Planner. So you have a group of experts and a whole range of different topics to answer any questions you may have this evening. And I'll just introduce myself as well. My name is Carol Hayward. I work within the Democracy and Engagement Department. I live in the Kaipatiki local board area in the North Shore Ward and used to work in the Rodney District Council area pre-amalgamation. So have experience of quite a lot of the northern area and issues. We're going to start by showing a short video. If I could ask Ross to share the video.
Sorry, Carol, I don't have the video here. I've got the presentation.
Looks like Marina's sharing it. Thank you, Marina.
This year is the year of recovery from COVID-19. We stopped the spread of the disease, but the economic impact and hit on council revenue was real. This 10-year budget is about how we get the best outcomes for Auckland. It will provide for our city's future while keeping our rates increases low compared to other growth cities in New Zealand. We'll help Auckland's economy recover, support our communities, build water and housing infrastructure, and improve our transport network. We'll continue to make progress on cleaning up our beaches and streams and on our long-term response to climate change. Auckland Council is forecast to take a $1 billion revenue hit because of COVID-19. This budget aims to find a balance between investing in our city and not overburdening our residents. We need your feedback on these issues and how we pay for them. To have your say, go to akhaveyoursay.nz/recovery budget and tell us what you think of our plans for the future of Auckland.
Thank you, Marina. So now I'm going to hand over to Ross and Andrew, who are going to take us through a short presentation to cover in more detail what some of the issues are within the 10-year budget. Over to you, Ross.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Kia ora, everyone. I'll just share this presentation. That's popping up okay. So this is, as Carol says, this is a presentation that just steps through a bit more detail around the key issues for the 10-year budget. So if we can, it doesn't seem to be moving on. Okay, there we go. So a 10-year budget. So firstly, well, what is a 10-year budget? It's a statutory document. Council prepares once every 3 years, looks at the priorities for the council for the upcoming 10 years and how to pay for them. It covers regional and local issues. It agrees borrowing and rates and borrowing levels. This 10-year budget is not just a business as usual 10-year budget because of the issues that the Mayor's kind of highlighted, a $1 billion revenue loss and all of the impacts that has on the council's finances. Consultation with the community is a key part of the process, and your feedback is really important to this process. So just stepping through to next slide. So, sorry, I think that's the video. Sorry, apology. How do I? Sorry. Just trying to figure out how to get to the next slide. Sorry, apologies.
The next slides come up on the screen, Ross, for me.
You can see it?
Yes, I can see it.
So while we're trying to fix our technology, we'll just perhaps we can. So we all understand that the council's experiencing significant financial impacts from COVID-19. Tonight's session really will be around 90 minutes in total. We're going to start with the presentation once we can get that one working again. And after that, we'll take questions and answers, and hopefully we'll be finished by 7:30 at the latest. Looks like your screen is now working again, Ross. If I'm back to you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I haven't driven up with this technology before. Okay, so this is not a business as usual budget. This is a very special case because of the impacts of COVID and other pressures on the council. So the Mayor's video talked about this being the key task being balancing things, so balancing investing in the city while keeping things affordable. So in terms of the key challenge, well, what's driving the demand? We see it as balancing the demand for investment versus the reduced capacity for investment. So we need to invest more in Auckland's transport network. Anyone that travels on the roads can see that. We need to meet changing community needs and invest in to support our communities. We've got a growing number of assets that are ageing and becoming in poor condition. So it's becoming increasingly becoming a challenge. Got rapid growth. Got to support Auckland's recovery. So while COVID has impacted the council's finances, we've still got a role to help the recovery and help support jobs and help our communities through this process. And we need to respond to the big challenge of climate change. At the same time, we've got reduced revenue due to the impact of COVID. So that's a lot of things impacting council's revenue. So rates is a large source of council's revenue, but the majority of council's revenue comes from other sources. So if you think about revenue the council gets from its airport shares, from the ports of Auckland, from regional facilities such as the zoo and stadiums, etc., many of those things have been impacted, and many other streams as well. At the same time, we've got many existing commitments, so big contracts such as the City Rail Link and other things that are locked in, we can't do anything about. We can use borrowing to help respond a little bit, but we've got to keep borrowing at responsible levels. And then we've got to consider what's the overall impact on the community. So in terms of the key issues, so the first one is around our budget package. So the budget package that we've come up with is a 31 billion package over 10 years. But what's kind of really critical is what happens in the first 3 to 5 years, which is where money is the tightest. So the budget package that we are proposing, it includes 900 million more investment over the next 3 years, achieved by three things. So I'll just bring that. So $90 million savings goal, some efficiency savings, 70 million per annum for the next 3 years from selling or leasing surplus property. So that's property that's not been used to deliver council services and surplus to requirements. So disposing of those, a bit of increased borrowing in the short term, and a one-off 5% rates increase. So rather than 3.5%, which is what is planned, the proposal is 5% rates increase for the coming year, and then 3.5% thereafter. So without that level of investment, Without those 4 funding levers, the investment that we can deliver for the city over the next 3 years will be severely constrained, and that's really driven by the impact of COVID in the council's finances. So without doing something, it means the council would have to significantly scale back its investment plans. It would mean just doing what is committed, most critical renewals, things for health and safety, but not a lot else. So that would be a highly constrained scenario. A lot of plans would have to be shelved or delayed. So this is a package that lets us proceed with an investment package that's going to better meet Auckland's needs, but these things have to be there to support it. So what specifically can we do with that 900 million? Well, a big chunk of it is in Auckland Transport, so that's it puts us back up to a credible investment package for Auckland Transport, so back in line with sort of pre-COVID levels. Not enough to do everything we want to do immediately, but it means 550 million extra across Auckland's transport network. So rather than just doing renewals and absolutely critical and committed projects, means that there are some discretionary projects that can happen, including the extra discretionary money that our local boards will be able to use and apply. It means accelerating the network of our local pipes network and additional stormwater infrastructure. So it's important that we look after our water pipes across the region and make sure that we've got enough investment in there to support growth and make sure that we avoid any asset failures. This package enables us to spend 65 million in additional parks and community funding. So it's a wide range of community projects around the place. So many of those are projects that are led by our local boards, and that without this funding, those would have to be delayed. It would also, with the funding package and the rates increase and other levers, it means we can do earlier restoration of the Auckland Art Gallery Heritage Building, and we can work to address health and safety concerns around some of the high priority closed landfill sites. So the second big issue is responding to climate change. So we need action to both look at reducing emissions and to deal with the impacts and effects of climate change. So it's mitigation and adaptation. So within the package that we're proposing, including the levers there and the 5% rates increase and higher debt, etc., we're able to accommodate 150 million more investment in climate change. So that's not the only investment the council's doing in climate change. There's a whole lot of things that have been done in terms of that have already been done, including the transport and water space. So investment in electric trains, etc., investments in public transport, and a whole lot of other things have been done in water and other spaces. But it's been recognised that what we've got at the moment isn't enough, and we need to do more. And particularly, this package enables Auckland Council to look after its emissions and do its bit and play a bit of a lead role. So what's within that package? So it means moving to electric and hydrogen buses. So with this package, we wouldn't need to continue to buy diesel buses. It means planting a whole lot more trees and urban forests, more efficient council facilities, so more energy efficient facilities, increased resource recovery network, so to promote greater recycling, etc. Planning for coastal change, so it's about mitigating, starting to work about how we're going to mitigate some of the impacts of climate change, and a bit of partnering with others and supporting communities. Next issue is around us responding to housing and growth. So the key theme here is focusing limited resources on key locations. So Auckland is growing rapidly, so people are coming here. Obviously the property market is still going very strong. Migration slow at the moment with borders closed, but if you take a long-term view, 10 years, 30 years, we still expect Auckland to be an area of rapid growth. So more people means more houses are needed, and more council services and infrastructure is required to support that. It is a challenge, providing infrastructure, new roads, new water pipes to provide for the scale of growth is challenging, and many of the cost estimates run into the billions. So that creates a significant challenge for the council. And so the choices are really, do we try and support growth everywhere, spend billions and billions, which would be very high rates increases and high debt for a long period of time, or do we try and focus that investment in the key areas where we're going to get the maximum benefit in terms of enabling housing and land for businesses. Investment in our community. So there's a growing challenge here. So many of the community assets were put in place many years ago. They were fit for purpose at the time and in great shape then, but they've aged and are no longer fit for purpose because the communities have changed, evolved, and many of them are getting to the point where it's becoming increasingly expensive to maintain and renew them. And we don't have the funding in our budget to replace to do all of the renewals required across that entire portfolio. So the question is, should we move away from focusing on a bunch of existing buildings and thinking more about the community services and think about how we can work with others to really focus on the services and the service outcomes that the communities need? So as I said, the community needs are changing. We want to move away from providing lots of council-owned facilities, which is a large network of many buildings and many properties that are aging, in need of repair, not necessarily meeting the community's needs as needs change. And so we're proposing to think about doing things differently. And that means better use of partnerships with others, maybe that's with schools or other people that own assets and are trying to provide similar services. So grants, so instead of council building and owning things, providing grants to others or third parties that can do that sort of thing. Looking at digital solutions, non-asset based approaches, and through this all, making sure it's tailored to community needs. And so working with our local boards to figure out what's going to meet the needs in different parts of Auckland, so we know the needs are different. This does mean that some existing facilities will close. So if we move away from providing large networks of the facilities and we look to build more, maybe it's consolidating and some fewer larger single-use facilities, or moving to partnerships and other things, that means some facilities may close over time. So last of the key issues is about protecting and enhancing the environment. It's increasing our investment in improving water quality and the natural environment. So 3 years ago, we introduced a thing called the Water Quality Targeted Rate. So it was a scheme for 10 years, and it's about making sure that the council invests enough to accelerate efforts to reduce overflows into the harbours and keep the harbours and streams and waterways in good health. So what we're proposing now is to continue to do that, so out to the end of 2031, so it's moving out to the end of the next 10-year period, and by extending it allows us to focus on some of the next lot of highest priorities. So the first priority was the Western Isthmus, and that's the areas around Herne Bay and Home Bay, places like that, where some of the worst overflows are occurring. The next areas after that are need of attention is the Manukau Harbour and the eastern beaches around the Auckland Isthmus. So one part of the proposal is to extend the rate. The other part is to increase it. So these rates basically don't increase like general rates. They've been flat historically. The proposal is to increase it every year along with the projected increase in general rates. And if we can increase this water quality target rate, we can do some of those key new initiatives, focus on other parts of the city, and do that 6 years earlier. Those are the kind of the big construction projects, but there's also a whole lot of smaller projects all across the city. So things like litter traps to capture litter rubbish in the stormwater system before it flows out to the sea. And that will be spread all across the region. And then the next bit is natural environment targeted rate. So again, we introduced this 3 years ago. It was to address things like carry dieback and some of the pest species, pest animals. The proposal is not to increase this one, but it's just to extend it so we can keep doing all of the good work around looking after the environment, looking after the natural plants and animals. The proposal is to extend that for 3 years to 2031. So those are key budget proposals. There's also a bunch of rates. Thanks, everybody. Before I hand over, there are some other things that are important that are not necessarily new proposals, but we just want to set the important things we'll keep doing. One is the council's come up to Marriott outcomes. There's 10 Marriott priorities, includes things like Mariah investment and you know, some of the renaming some of the place naming activities that are going on. So that is a high priority and that will continue. And also social investment. So that is some of the grants to community groups most in need. That's working to address the homelessness issue and some of the key initiatives in the south and west of Auckland to address communities most in need. So again, high priority, and we're just proposing to keep those activities going. So I'll hand over to Andrew Duncan to talk about the rates side of things. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Ross. Good evening, everyone. Ross has talked about the key elements of the balance to enable us to continue to invest in the city. One of those is a proposed 5% one-off rates increase this year. Now, for the average capital value property in Auckland, which is $1.08 million for a residential property, the annual change in rates will be $150. And that includes the $3.30 for the water quality targeted rate increase that Ross spoke about earlier to fund additional investment in cleaning up our beaches and harbours. There's also a small $1.68 for the base waste management rate. It's about $3 a week for the average residential property. The average value business property, $2.84 million, the increase would be $583. So on the next slide, you can see exactly where you can find out how much your property would have their rates change next year and the different key components of that change to help you form your views that we're looking to hear from through this process. So not all properties are the average value. You can go to this link and find out how you'll be affected by the 5% increase and by some of the other changes, if indeed you are affected, that I'm going to talk about now. So at the moment, residential and business properties outside our urban rating area pay what we call rural level rates. So they pay 90% of the cents in the dollar that properties in the urban area do. Farm and lifestyle properties, wherever they're located in the region, pay 80% of the cents in the dollar of rates that urban properties pay, urban residential properties pay. Now, we set this urban rating area about 10 years ago. The city's growing and expanding a lot. And since that time, we've had development on the outskirts of the city, and some of our rural towns are now coming closer to the city and having service levels rising up towards those that are available in our urban areas. So we're proposing in the budget that the urban rating area be expanded to include all land where urban development's permitted. We haven't included Warkworth there because their service levels haven't risen as much towards those available in urban areas. We're also proposing to charge farm and lifestyle properties within the urban rating area the urban residential rate, where these properties can also be developed for residential or business use. The key thing here is we're wanting to ensure that properties nearby that have got similar access to services are paying similar rates, whereas at present their neighbours just over the urban rating area boundary are paying higher rates. We've got some other proposed changes to rating policies. So this year, in response to the closure of our borders and the reduction we'd made in our spending to attract visitors to Auckland, we suspended the accommodation provider targeted rate for a year. Now, the accommodation provider targeted rate is paid by owners of properties such as hotels, motels, and Airbnb properties. We look to recover from them about half of the cost of our visitor attraction and major event spending. Last year, because we'd cut our spending, we suspended the rate for a year. The council's looking for feedback on when we should reinstate that rate. Do we bring it back at the end of that first year, which will be the 1st of April this year? Or do we bring it back on the 1st of July this year or the 1st of January next year? We've also got a proposal to put a rate on Vector to pay for an enhanced management of trees near our trees near their power lines. And this would enable us to improve public safety around power lines and to improve the security of electricity supply. We also have a city centre targeted rate that applies to businesses and residential properties in the city centre. And that allows us to fund additional investment in the city centre beyond what we could do with general rates to make the city centre a more attractive place to live, visit and work. Now, at the moment, this rate expires in 2024-25. We're proposing to extend it to the end of the life of this plan, 2030-31. This year, we're also looking to introduce a bus service between Paremarema and Albany, and this would allow the residents in the Paremarema area to connect to the wider public transport network. And we've got a couple of options for how that targeted rate would apply, and it would only apply to the residents in that area. Now that's all the key rates issues. Pass back to you, Ross.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Andrew. So I guess to find out more, then the key place to go is the website for this consultation. So www.akhaveyoursay.nz/recovery budget. You can attend a webinar like this one. There's various other ones that have been held. You can provide feedback online. So there's a series of questions that we want feedback on. You can go online and fill that in, and you can also link to all of the material there. And a thing called the consultation document, which is an 80-page document, gives you everything you need to know. You can request the documents at at libraries or service centres. You can download it online, or if you go to the website, you can find the information online to click through the bits that you need. So you can you can contact AK Have Your Say at aucklandcouncil.gov.nz to get hard copies, to get hard copy form to fill in, and there's translations available in various languages as indicated on the screen there. You can also provide views through social media, through the Recovery Budget Facebook page. You can use Twitter and other things like that. So it's all so Instagram, Twitter, Facebook are all there. Key thing is this hashtag AK Have Your Say across all of those platforms. So if you comment on Recovery Budget and use that AK Have Your Say, we can capture that those kind of feedback points up and capture that as well. So I think that is, again, that's the website there, and that's the end of the presentation. Back to you, Carol, for questions.
Thank you, Ross and Andrew, for your excellent kind of overview of the consultation. So just to reiterate, all of the information on the consultation is on the akhaveyoursay.nz website. There's information there in summary format, there are translated materials, there are feedback forms, there is the full documentation, and there are a range of videos. So welcome to anyone who's joined us since we started this session. I just wanted to let you know that this is being recorded. And so this will be available on the AK Have Your Say webpage in due course. We've started to get some questions through the Q&A function. So anyone who was here, who's joined us and isn't sure how to ask a question, you'll see a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. If you would like to ask a question, please put it in there. And we may, if we aren't able to answer any questions live tonight, then we will find a subject matter expert and answer it, and it will be published on the website again after today's session. I just wanted to also check we seem to we have one more councillor who's joined us, Councillor Shane Henderson from the West, and we have an unknown panel member. I'm not sure if they're able to put their video on so that we can see who has joined us. But in the meantime, I think we'll go straight to some of the questions. So if we'll start with the first question we were asked, which is, can the budget cover planting more trees in the North Shore streets and playgrounds, e.g. Takapuna, Milford, Kennedy Park, Mairangi Bay, etc., to have natural shade and help the environment? So we're going to hand this one over to Councillor Richard Hills, who is Chair of the Environment and Community Climate Change Committee, who can hopefully start this one off.
Good everyone, and awesome to have a group of attendees on tonight. Not a big number, but it's Sunday night, so thank you for being here. On trees in general, so we already have quite a significant amount of planting that happens in our parks, streets, and stormwater projects like Healthy Waters, and we have the Mayor's 1.5 million trees, which happens within a 3-year window. But this budget plans to ramp that up with another 11,000 mature trees to be planted in our streets and parks, and with a plan for nurseries that will produce 200,000 seedlings a year. Plus, we're going to plant over 200 hectares of native forest mostly in our regional parks, but I'm sure that can spill over into some of our bigger local parks as well. Local parks are a local board. They have the decision making over local parks, but when I was on a local board, and maybe Aidan might want to add, that we always would ask for trees to be part of upgrades or other projects. Their boards, we thanks to people like Angela Dalton and others advocating for keeping our local driven initiatives for local boards at 100%. There was no reduction in that through the emergency budget, and we're not reducing that through this budget either. That budget can be apportioned into planting as well. So there's definitely opportunities with this budget it's not all set in stone of where those trees are going to go. But I will say that the North Shore, we have very good tree cover, 30-something% in Kaipatiki and about 20% urban tree coverage in Devonport, Takapuna. But whereas in the south, we have about 6 to 9% in most of the southern local boards. So a lot of that investment will be going south to bring it up to what we are blessed with on the North Shore, but there will still be trees and planting happening right across the North Shore. But it's important to know that actually Kaipatiki and Devonport, Takapuna over the last 5 years has actually grown tree cover in the last 2 years on public land. The issue we have is private land that the trees are being reduced, but it's always something that myself and Aidan and Chris will definitely take on board. But that's project to project, and if you've got a plan or an idea, I'm sure the local board would be happy to work with us to get that done in a specific park.
Thank you, Richard. Aidan, did you want to add anything to the response?
No, I think Richard's covered it pretty well. In terms of the local board, we are unanimously committed to supporting entities and the planting of trees. We support Takaranga Hauraki Restoration Group on the shore, the Pupuki Birdsong Project, who are tree planting as well. I know we've got a project coming up also at Takapuna Beach, which is some enhancements to our lovely playground there, and that will involve some new planting as well. So it's certainly happening, but I guess we do have a pretty established area as well, with not a heap of change when you compare it to what's happening in other parts of the city. But it's certainly something that we are committed to as a local board.
Thank you, Aidan. Can I go to Alec Tang, our Chief Sustainability Officer? Is there anything you'd like to add in response to this question?
No, I think Richard and Aidan have covered it. I think, as Richard noted, there is funding, significant funding around forestry reforestation as part of our climate response. But I think I just want to reiterate the point that Ross made. about, the climate investment package is great. It's 150 million of additional funding there, but that's not the only investment in climate that we're seeing across the whole budget. And there are a range of activities, existing funding around million trees from the mayor's program and so on. And all of that will help towards meeting those dual climate goals that we've set through Te Tātaki Ātawhi Auckland's climate plan, about halving emissions by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050, and also preparing for the impacts of climate change. And I just want to reiterate that as a really important part of our climate response. We know the climate is going to change. We know we're going to get warmer. We know we're going to get more storms. So hand in hand with reducing emissions, we need to find those interventions like street trees, which help a bit with the emissions reduction, but actually, really help when we're thinking about those hotter temperatures that we're going to see and managing greater stormwater and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you, Alec. So while we're on the subject of environmental projects and initiatives, there's another question around the Kaipatiki community, which is investing in pest control and nursery. Are any funds going to climate actions in our area? I think this is another one for Richard, if I can ask you to respond, please.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. And also thank you and the staff that are running this call as well. Sorry, I didn't acknowledge you at the beginning. Once again, the Kaipatiki local board they've got a huge focus in this area. They've got a pest-free Kaipatiki group with a whole bunch of volunteers. So volunteers are gold in this area. We are helping with the natural environment targeted rate in that area. So with seed funding, pardon the pun, and a lot of initiatives, say in pest-free Kaipatiki project. There are huge stormwater projects. So Te Awa Awataha, the Healthy Waters project in conjunction with, I think it's about $13 million project with Panuku, Kāinga Ora, Healthy Waters and Kaipatiki project are working in that space too. And that's a significant bringing back the streams, getting rid of the concrete and significant planting in that area. There are, we're obviously regionally supporting the pest-free Kaipatiki initiatives, but also the local board has quite significant budgets in that area. But also the natural environment targeted rate, which we're asking to extend here. There's actually quite significant budget for the North Shore in there as well. We're quite blessed to have the existing Kauri forest, but obviously that means there's a lot of money to help protect it. So there's millions each year for the next few years through the natural environment targeted rate to build more walkways to protect our Kauri. There are quite a few of our tracks closed right now, and some of them are starting to open. You would have seen in Eskdale, Leroy's Bush, Kauri Point, quite amazing new tracks, and that's going to continue for the next 10 years, as well as this significant number of cleaning stations. So we do have 540 hectares of native bush reserve in Kaipatiki and over onto other parts of the North Shore, and so we are getting quite a significant amount of that funding onto the shore for those reasons. So if you're talking specifically in pests and protecting on Kauri, that's there, but obviously we're going to have a whole lot of other work. The electric buses will be right across the city, which will include the North Shore. There'll be a lot of other work done with community groups as well.
Thank you, Richard. I just wanted to take a moment to welcome Councillor John Watson, Councillor for the Albany Ward. So welcome, thank you for joining us tonight. And I'd encourage our attendees to keep your questions coming. We've got a few more in the pool, but we'd really encourage you to ask as many questions as you'd like to. We'll move on to a question around public transport now. So a question from Michael: any investment in public transport for North Shore, any chance to improve the commute to Central? And I will ask Councillor Chris Darby to respond to that one. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Michael. Close to my heart, and Richard Hills, other councillor for the North Shore, and I'm sure just about every councillor and board member on this call. Look, the short answer is there's never enough for PT because there's just an incredible demand for it. There's a whole revolution happening in Auckland. It's a good one too, and that is people are embracing public transport and active transport, walking and cycling to terminals, etc., in phenomenal numbers. And the Northern Busway is just a runaway success. And about 55% of the people crossing the Auckland Harbour Bridge in the AM peak are actually now travelling that route by public transport. It doesn't look like that sometimes when you look at the queues of cars. But just to go to some key numbers that you might be interested in, Michael, on the PT side, because you asked specifically about PT for the North Shore and also access to the city centre by public transport. The Northern Busway is a massive success, as I mentioned, and we're very aware that we need to keep investing in that. So we'll be looking at some enhancements there. That's about $60 million. We've got the final stages of the busway extension up to Albany. We've still got about 130 million to spend there. New station at Rosedale, and we've got a big upgrade happening right now, and that'll keep, it'll take a while to complete. So that's another 60 million for Rosedale and Constellation. So all up in that part of the busway, around about 270 million. As was mentioned earlier, we're going all electric on buses once we pass this budget. So that's a massive move, and the big reduction in emissions and belching diesels will slowly be a thing of the past. Another thing up in the Rosedale corridor, we've got about another 9 million for improvement to bus services with that new Rosedale station. And that'll help the areas where Councillor Watson is representing, Councillor Walker and Councillor Sayers, allowing those services to grow out of that new station. There's big investments in bus services that we get a share of in the city centre and downtown. That's about 350 million. And of course, you'll be aware, if you're taking a bus from the shore to the city and you land in there at the bottom of Albert Street, all that infrastructure is recent. There's a bit more to go. So we grab a share of that 350 million as well. Integrated ticketing, public transport safety, over the next 10 years is about 400 million in that area. And then the big number is just the operational budget to make sure that this massive fleet of bus and ferry for us, and then rail, if you're connecting through to rail, just keeps, we keep those rolling reviews of services and keep enriching that scheduled and making sure that we've got the right people to operate the system. That's a massive $7.1 billion over the next little while. A couple of other roading projects that have a big bus priority component to them. Lake Esmond, about 47 million there. Back up to Councillor Watson and Councillor Walker's area with Glenvar Road, 63 million. We're looking at bus priority lanes and T2, T3 lanes wherever we can. But look, that's the good news. But maybe if I just also am very honest, because we need to be pretty candid in these sessions, there are some challenges. There's challenges in the ferry space. We haven't quite landed a ferry procurement plan at the moment, but we are working on it hard, I promise. We are looking at low wake and electric vessels, and there's some possible big and quite dramatic changes in how we operate ferries in the future. Some of you on this call will know that one operator has a monopoly on Waiheke and Devonport, and Richard and I have been talking to the Minister of Transport, former and current, about changing that model. So big investment as outlined there. Oh, another one, we've still got about, I think it's about 50 or 70 million dollars to invest in the downtown ferry terminal. And once we unlock that downtown ferry terminal, that's where the congestion is at the moment, then we can start to grow the services. And that means services well beyond the North Shore, going up to the west and up to Whangaparoa, etc. So that's a bit of a snapshot. Thanks for that question, Michael.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Do any of our other councillors wish to respond to that question as well? I'm thinking particularly our more northern councillors, Councillor Watson or Councillor Sayers.
Yep, I'm happy to, Carol. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know which part of the shore you're in, Michael, but certainly in the northern part, there's some pretty dramatic changes occurring. You'll no doubt be aware as if you're driving down from the Hibiscus Coast or the East Coast Bays, the Northern Busway extension from Constellation up to Albany is going to be a bit of a game changer, certainly in terms of the travel speed. Just last week, a new bus terminal was opened at Hibiscus Coast Station. So we have the second biggest park and ride in New Zealand at Hibiscus Coast. We have the biggest one at Albany, and the Northern Busways feeding into those two facilities. So certainly the further north you go, the more important access to the busway is via the park and rides, which are proving incredibly successful in getting people out of cars and onto buses. So all up, I think the bus enhancements on the shore generally, and particularly in the northern part of it, courtesy of the Northern Motorway improvements, are going to be pretty significant, and the full effect of those are going to become very apparent over the next year or so. Just echoing a little bit Councillor Darby's sentiments in respect of the ferry services, because in many respects, the ferry services are an important component of the northern area's transport network in terms of specific catchments. We certainly would like to see greater progress there in terms of quality of vessels in the first instance, but then service enhancements too. So our area, we haven't got trains, but we do have the best bus service in Auckland, and we should have the best ferry service as well. So without going into too much more detail or repeating myself, as far as the bus goes, we've seen a meteoric improvement over the last 5 years, and that is going to be sustained, which is really good news for anyone who travels by bus on the North Shore. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Right, let's move on to another question. We've got one for the far north. Thank you. What can Wellsford, the northernmost region of Auckland Council, expect to be delivered? Our infrastructure is broken. We struggle to get anything substantial across the board. Our community is concerned this budget will disadvantage us further. Your specific comments, please, on how Auckland Council plans to bring us up to base levels as enjoyed in other Auckland regions. Perhaps I could ask Councillor Sayers to start us off with that one.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much. I recognise a number of the names from Rodney on our chat session as well. So look, I think probably the main thing to answer that question is just to encourage the community and the people asking that question to submit into this budget now, as you just have done, and also perhaps more formally through the Happy to Say sessions. I think it's important. The first question you'll come across is, do you support this budget in full or not? So if you don't, we need to understand why. So if you can note down reasons why you might feel that your township isn't being supported financially. There are obviously some big figures being mentioned on the North Shore and the CBD, which probably aren't reflected fairly as clearly for Wellsford. So maybe we can get some clarification on the investment that is going into Wellsford. But I think it's important in terms of the advocacy that the Rodney Local Board has been doing and supported by myself. I think the attendees, it might be helpful to understand the messaging that has been going into the governing body and Auckland Transport and the other divisions of the council. And they've been really in three key areas. The first one is around the unsealed roading network, which is right around Wellsford, includes Wellsford area. What's being proposed is under a 5% rate increase, a investment of 40 million over the 10 years, so roughly 4 million a year on average. That's a decrease from the existing budget of 101 million. So you may want to make comment around that on in your feedback. The second thing that all elected members have been advocating for is around the Auckland Transport renewals. Again, this will affect Wellsford. So Auckland Transport's renewal budget is going up. We've heard that the renewals are going up. So we need to just ensure that there's a reflection into Rodney of a proportionate amount coming back into the Rodney's renewal space. That's in both the sealed network and the unsealed network. And finally, probably not specifically for Wellsford, but the other advocacy point, so people understand, has been around the Rodney Local Board's Ollie, which they've had in there. It's an indoor sports court down in Huapai. That was in the budget to be completed, but has been pushed out and deferred a few years. So I think the key message there is, look, there's a lot of the budget, as we've been explained by Ross and others, going into the renewable space, but there's also a lot of pressure in terms of growth as well. So it's whether you as a ratepayer or resident feel that the balance is right in terms of the pressure in the growth areas, which includes Wellsford. You've got a lot going on up there as well, is being balanced adequately in your mind. So look, I could mention dozens of other things, Carol, but I think although I can't give the direct figure of what investment is going into Wellsford, other officers might be able to comment on that. The key things, there's other key things around, say, the Wellsford Township, and has it got a centre plan? Is there a plan for investment in making that township feel better, look better, and increase its functionality as a key township that all traffic going north goes through? Weed and pest control will be important for Wellsford, and also perhaps comment on the Hill Street intersection fix. Both in this budget you could comment, and also later there's another chance to comment in the regional land transport plan in a few weeks, Carol, which people might be interested to know about as well, because that's an important document that feeds into the overall budget decision. So I hope that's helpful, not too long-winded. I thought it was important to emphasise the hard work that's been going in by Rodney Local Board members, and I'm trying to support that position with them as well. It's always nice if the community can get behind that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. So yes, the RLTP, the Regional Land Transport Plan, will be going out for consultation. My understanding is it's now going to be going out for consultation on the 29th of March and will be also open for a month. Perhaps we could ask our lead planner, Anna Jennings, to add to the response on Wellsford. Anna, are you able to give us a little bit more information?
Kia ora, thank you. Just building on Councillor Sayers has just talked through, I really encourage people to submit and put comments forward. Infrastructure is a huge challenge right across our city, and certainly this being a recovery budget has made it even harder for us to focus in where we spend that infrastructure money. So within the proposed budget document for consultation, there's an approach, having a focused approach to housing and growth infrastructure. So that means we need to focus in on where we target our infrastructure investment, and it's hard. We've also got to balance off where we're doing renewal work, which is another point that Councillor Sayers touched on as well. So it's I'd encourage people to have a read through the document, have a look at the proposed approach we're taking to housing and growth infrastructure and where we should focus, and put their comments forward on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Councillor Cashmore, I wondered if you'd like to comment in terms of, in general, what's happening in the rural areas.
Thanks very much, Carol. And I do appreciate and understand the challenges that the Rodney area faces. It's a very, very big piece of Auckland. I think it was 46% of the land area or something like that. Franklin's not quite as big, but the challenges are very similar to the rural and the diverse nature of rural communities. And it's hard to attract sufficient investment because there's a lot less people per kilometre of roading. And we won't even talk about footpaths that generally don't exist. But however, what we can do is actually find smart ways forward. I congratulate the Rodney Local Board and Councillor Sayers on their work they've done around improving roading, not necessarily sealing, which costs $1 million a kilometre, but the improvement of the shingle roads that they have in Northern Rodney to make them a lot more resilient standard. And they can do 10 kilometres for $1 million. And that's been work, it's been taken 3 years of trials, and it's now landing. And I have sympathy for increasing the Rodney budget for sealing as well, where it's needed. Now that's work we can do with Auckland Transport going forward. Councillor Sayers and I have been doing that. This budget, this COVID budget, this recovery budget is a challenge because of the $1 billion loss in our incomes. We've had to postpone some projects, put some off, and stretch the dollar a lot thinner over a lot faster growing population. So it's not easy, Carol and viewers, but the challenges are there, and we are up to doing our best to get some resolutions as fast as we can. But I will not promise miracles tomorrow. It's just not possible.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. So keep the questions coming. We've still got a few more to answer. So thank you all so much for posting your questions for our panelists tonight. The next question I've got on my list is, what about housing on the shore? We need more affordable houses. Rents are getting higher and higher. And I'm going to pose this one to Councillor Darby to start us off.
Yeah, look, thanks, Carol. And yeah, that's such a key question. It's probably a question on just the minds of so many young people at the moment who are really worried about the runaway, prices of housing, whether you are looking to buy a house or to rent a house. So in the area of housing affordability, the key thing is we need to do a lot more nuanced work, and we are. Of course, we've brought in the Auckland Unitary Plan from 2016, and we've gone through just about all the appeals on that now, and it's operative, and that enables or makes feasible the development in the within the rural urban boundary, within the rural urban boundary in the brownfields area, and a little bit on the edges. Some 1 million dwellings can potentially be built. Now, that Auckland Unitary Plan is really starting to do its work now. So we're seeing a record number of dwelling consents, around about 17,000 in the last, that's dwelling consents in the last year. We haven't seen that in Auckland's history. So the hard work and controversial work that we did with the Auckland Unitary Plan is starting to bite, and it is delivering supply, but not enough. But your question is key at homes and around affordability, and supply is not necessarily enough to create affordability. And we've seen that with fantastic supply coming on, primarily due to the Auckland Unitary Plan, but the prices going up. So we are in discussions with government right now about other levers that need to be pulled to ensure that there is affordability within that supply, and that's to buy and to rent. One of the things that our council has looked at in some planning committee meetings recently or last year was looking at inclusionary zoning. We've just got that on hold at the moment. I won't go into the detail of that, but it's a method of retaining affordable values in housing. We've had a lot of success with government lobbying them on changing tenancy law to validate renting and give greater tenant rights and security for tenants. That's all really important to affordability. But there are a number of things that I would have to admit are in train at the moment. They're not landed. And we are closely working with government on that. We've got joint working party with senior ministers. I think it's myself, Councillor Hills, and the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Cashmore, who's just we've just heard from. We're going to be meeting, I think it's late this week, with the joint ministers, including the Minister of Housing and the Minister of Transport, to address this very question. This is not resolved overnight. That's no excuse for not attacking it. It just is a lot of balls in the air. There's a lot of levers to pull to address affordability. It is going to be a decade-long job to achieve, but we are absolutely committed to it.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Darby. Councillor Cashmore, did you want to add anything to that response?
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Thanks to Chris for his complete answer. There's been multiple generations in the making, this housing unaffordability. We are starting to build more and more houses. As Chris said, we've got consent through for record numbers of houses year on year, more than we've ever seen in the city before. So we are biting into it. But at the same token, there is thousands of people coming to Auckland every year. 100,000 people went through MIQ this past year. That's Kiwis returning home. And a big chunk of those, maybe 50, maybe even 60% of them are staying in Auckland, because that's where there's employment opportunities. And that's creating and adding to the stress of housing. we need to do more. We need to do more around the major transport hubs. You know, those bus stations on that northern busway need a lot more intensification of housing around those sorts of areas, I would suggest. Around with ferry terminals, more intensification. This is a way to get affordable housing in and to build larger numbers to reduce that shortage faster and faster. That is our challenge. Some of it's addressed through the government's legislation on planning for housing, and I welcome that. But we still need to crank up the industry. The actual building industry itself, productivity hasn't moved in 35 years, partially because the sizes of houses, the complexity of houses has grown considerably, but also because we haven't moved into the modern factory built type houses or the Lego block putting together of multiple homes quickly. So there are some challenges we need to face as a council, but also particularly as MB through the government. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. So let's change topic slightly. I think we have...
Carol, can I just come in quickly?
Sure.
There was a question about affordable housing on the North Shore, and certainly in the northern part of the North Shore, the result on the ground is just increasingly more expensive housing, which really renders the word affordability something of a misnomer, if we're going to be honest. The council's ability to, if we're similarly honest, to affect that affordability is limited. The council has certainly opened up a lot more land for development. So the council has done its bit through the unitary plan. But I would have to say, coming up to 5 years on, the basic fundamental assumptions of more and different typologies of housing resulting in cheaper prices or more affordable houses has not proven to be the case. In fact, if you look at the terraced housing, the apartment style housing relative to single dwellings, it's almost as expensive, and that's particularly the case on the North Shore, despite areas, for instance, where there might previously have been one house and then now can be 8 houses, as happening in some of the mixed housing suburban. That's not resulting in a corresponding decrease in cost. In fact, it's the costs have gone up, as I said at the outset. So really, I think Councillor Cashmore perhaps in part alluded to the need for something far more radical, and that really has to come from central government. Modular housing might conceivably have some effect, but we're really looking for something a lot more revolutionary than we've seen thus far, because the prices just keep going up, the demand, and that will continue as long as the demand's still there. So in the North Shore in particular, but Auckland as a whole, of course, we really need a new way of looking at housing if indeed the huge sectors of our population that are currently cut out from housing are to actually have the opportunity to own their own home, which was in the past a fundamental expectation of most people living in New Zealand. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Was there anyone else who wanted to talk to this?
Just briefly, just on the, we are seeing some of, and obviously it wasn't, you wouldn't consider it affordable at all a few years ago, but in Northcote, the NZ Living, they just did a ballot for some Kiwi build and non-Kiwi build near Greenslade and Northcote, and they were going for 600,000 to 700,000. Glenfield, they've just on Glenfield Road, there's been a couple of houses turned into 74 apartments, and those are going for between 400 and 650, and a few other typologies like that. So Kiwi build or not, those apartments and terrace housing, although people are getting used to it, are actually bringing the price compared to the $1 million average, actually bringing them quite down for people who are choosing to live or would like to live like that, and also enabling us as a council, enabling that infrastructure for Kāinga Ora, like Beachhaven. Now that we've been able to put a 5-minute bus service in there in 2018, there's now a significant uptick in Kāinga Ora housing. I think 5 on Beachhaven Road, 5 houses turning into something like 120 or something like that. So obviously that's a big change for people. It's pretty tough, you know, to see that change so quickly, but it is providing more affordable homes for people to live in or purchase than maybe sort of the single housing $1 million to $1.5 million housing. But it's enabling us enabling that infrastructure, much like the Greenslade upgrade right now and all that work on the Awataha streams in Northcote, which then enables the developments to happen, because without that new water, stormwater and wastewater infrastructure, we couldn't do it. So although we do get development contributions, we are providing that infrastructure through council. So we can't always provide the affordable house itself or the tax changes that might be needed, but we are trying our best in the areas we can do that.
Thank you, Councillor Hills.
Happy to add something to the mix.
Sure.
Sure. So we're speaking to a number of members of the public or the like, I'm assuming. So from my perspective, the fundamental problem that goes to housing and infrastructure is a financial problem. And probably, as other people have explained, we're in a really hard place. Normally for long-term assets, we raise long-term debt. But when you've got growth of the nature that we have in Auckland, that is significant growth, against a background where we can't service that growth, that borrowing through rates, and we've got a limit on our debt, we're in a major problem. That problem is also compounded because our operational costs are going to go up as public transport use goes up, because public transport has a relatively high subsidy. So it's a real catch-22 situation, and the only party that can address that is the government. And at this stage, the government is not addressing it in terms of making sufficient capital available to us and sufficient income available to us to service debt and to service our operational costs. So we have a major problem that is getting worse. It's also compounded because the contributions that we get from developers are woefully insufficient to pay for the costs of the additional infrastructure. So where does that cost get racked home to? Effectively, it gets racked home to the existing ratepayer base, which can't afford it. So it's a real catch-22 situation that we have.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. So there is some help available for ratepayers, and I'd just like to ask Andrew Duncan to outline what support there is through the council.
So for those who might be struggling to pay their rates, and certainly we recognise that not everyone will always find it easy to do that, particularly with the impact of COVID on some of our ratepayers. So the council will assist with scheduling the payments of rates, allowing people to pay their rates over time if you contact our rates call centre. In addition, we offer a rates postponement scheme where ratepayers with equity in their property can postpone their rates at the council's interest rates. This applies to all residential properties where the person's the owner-occupier of the house and it's not income or means tested. In addition, the council administers the government's rates rebate scheme, and this is income tested, but for those who qualify, it offers up to $655 this year. It may go up next year as a rebate against your rates bill. So if you are having any issues with paying your rates, I'd encourage you to call our call centre and they'll work with you to see what we can do to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So we're going to move on to a different topic now. So one of the other areas that was covered during the initial presentation was around community services and facilities. And we do have a question in the question box around, could anyone talk about community investments? We love our leisure centres and libraries. Any investments on those? And I'm just going to look around the room. I think I'm handing this over to Ross to answer this one, or was there any councillors who wanted to jump in there first? Handing over to Ross, thank you.
Okay, I'll jump in here if councillors want to jump in after me. That's fine. So I guess just to give some assurance, that the proposal here is not to get the council out of the business of providing community facilities. So we know people love libraries and love swimming pools. It's a question of we've got a very large portfolio, a whole range of different community assets that are aging. So what do we do with them? Do we just keep investing in all of the existing buildings just because they're there now? As all of the discussion about how much it costs to fix the roof, or is that the best use of the money? If we were to put all of the money just fixing up our existing assets, there'd be no money to build new things or to provide services that the community needs. So it's not about getting rid of libraries and swimming pools. It's about how do we provide the service better and make the best use of the money, make best use of the limited money that is available. So some examples of things the council's been doing. So one example is multi-use facilities. So the council's been doing a number of those recently. One example is out by the Northwest Shopping Centre. There's the new Te Manawa combined library and community hub. And it's been a very successful multi-use facility. So rather than building two or replacing existing facilities, it's about creating a new multi-use facility, one facility as opposed to many. Another example is it's a south example, but it's the Takanini Community Hub, where it's, again, library and community hub together. What's different about that example is that council was really struggling to find any land to put it on. So what they ended up doing is the council entered into a lease with a developer property owner to get us a win-win outcome. That means the council's not owning the property, but is just leasing it. Some other examples is the digital side of things. So in the lockdowns last year, wanted to get people out using parks more. So there's some digital apps launched to let people know more about where to find parks and cycleways. And basically what that did is it saw a lot of existing parks better utilised. So you could use existing facilities as opposed to necessarily just thinking about building more. Also in the lockdown, you saw a lot of people, a whole lot less people came into our libraries to borrow books because they couldn't. But the use of digital resources, so ebooks, spiked dramatically. So there's opportunities there to think about, how do we use some of our digital services as well. There are very real opportunities to work with Ministry of Education and other parties. There's examples such as indoor courts facility that was mentioned earlier about in Kiwi Tuapai. Are there opportunities to work with local sporting groups where they've got facilities that need upgrade? How do we pull together and combine resources, work in partnership to get the outcomes everyone wants? So it's not a question of making decisions through this budget and then rushing ahead and closing a bunch of facilities. This is more of a longer term thing. Some things we can do quickly and easily, like digital services. Other things will take time, and there'll be lots of working with local boards. There may have to be further consultation through future annual budgets or the next 10-year budget in 3 years' time. So it's the start of a longer term journey about how do we think differently and get more value out of our community facilities. It's got the services and the people first, and thinking about maintaining old buildings secondary to that.
Thank you, Ross. And you've also nicely answered the follow-up question, which was around the concern that there had been no consultation on what the facilities might change and how they might change. So as Ross said, this is something that will be going for further consultation once some initial thoughts have been given to it. Any of our councillors wish to add anything to that discussion?
Yeah, sure. Carol, John Watson here. And that's a good question. I think the questioner referred to the council's intentions being a little vague. Hopefully Ross's response maybe clarifies that a little. Certainly on the North Shore, our libraries, which there's never been any suggestion anything will happen to the libraries, but certainly our leisure centres as well are incredibly well used, incredibly important to the communities, whether you're in Glenfield, Takapuna, East Coast Bays or Hibiscus Coast. Those council-run leisure centres are absolutely chocker and serve a huge variety of people in the community. So what over and above that might be involved in this is a little unclear, and I guess hopefully that will become a little more apparent with the passage of time. Certainly in the past, when councils look to go into some sort of agreements or arrangements with schools, for instance, in terms of shared facilities, often that that can be very challenging, and on the ground there hasn't been really too many partnerships that have resulted as a consequence of that, which all tends to lead to the conclusion that like it or not, communities rely a lot on the council to provide these sort of services, and that if you attempt to go out to private enterprise, or alternative facilities in the community like schools, it's very challenging. So it's evolving. What comes out of that by way of specific recommendations or possibilities, we'll have to wait and see. But I think from what Ross has said, we can rest pretty assured that certainly in terms of libraries, leisure centres, etc., there's no moves to alter any of the ways that they're currently functioning.
Can I add something to John?
Sure, Councillor Walker.
And I think the concern, and it goes to the question that Chris is putting up around the amount of additional immigration into the country. Yes, we may be able to look to schools and come to arrangements with them. But what is happening is our school rolls are coming under increasing pressure. We have any number of instances where the fields in schools are being given over to more classroom facilities. And as school rolls increase and the need for indoor and outdoor space in those schools increase, it may be increasingly more difficult for the community to share spaces with schools. The other thing that is also happening in schools is increasingly they're becoming more secure and more difficult for the public to actually access because of security issues in schools in parts of Auckland that are intensifying. So as much and all as it's something that we can consider, I agree with my fellow councillor John Watson, there are issues into the future, and picking up on Chris's issue about ongoing immigration, we need to be looking at what sort of limits we could be facing in some of these areas, because our development contributions do not enable us to generate the additional reserve and recreation space in brownfield areas or greenfield areas that the public of Auckland have traditionally been used to. So a note of concern there.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Hills, you'd like to add something to the discussion?
Yeah, just I think the issue is we're just testing to see what people's thoughts are. This will always be a process through the local board. When I was on the local board, we had issues with halls that were old, mouldy, cold and barely used. We decided to use renewal budgets and other budgets to work together to turn them into something else. So using a facility and making it a youth centre, or using a facility and getting other people in, and maybe getting other organisations to pay rent or use that space in the day when it wasn't used. So it was those kind of things that wasn't a Auckland Council directive. It was an idea that came across because we didn't have budget to upgrade it to the way we wanted at the time. So we just used some creative means to do that. We also put money into resurfacing basketball courts at a primary school in Birkdale, and now that is open to the public. The current local board has put money into tennis courts at Glenfield College for youth, public youth outside of that. So it's being creative with the money you have, with the facilities you have at the times you've got. So it's sort of, adding to that. We're not increasing libraries. In fact, in this budget, we're increasing the number of libraries we have. On the North Shore, we're actually fairly lucky compared to most of the city. We've got more libraries. I mean, for instance, we've even got, if you include Albany Pool, Birkenhead, Takapuna and Glenfield, we've got 4 pool complexes, leisure pools, and the West has 1 for the whole West, same population. So, there are things that we need to discuss as a council, but on the North Shore, we are quite blessed in facilities. We just have to make sure we have the budget, or we are to replace all these assets, which becomes more and more expensive every year. So it's always about how can we use them better? How can we ensure that if the numbers are dropping, we are bringing other incomes in, or creative ways to do things, because otherwise everyone says they don't want the rates high, and at the moment that's the best way to bring in the dollars.
Thank you, Richard. So we just wanted to note to the audience that there will be a webinar very focused on community investments tomorrow evening. So if you go onto the AKA Have Your Say webpage, you can register for that if you'd like to have a more in-depth conversation. So we've got just over 10 minutes to go till the end of this webinar. So we still have a few questions to answer. So what I'm going to do is go through the questions and just ask one person to answer each of the ones that we have remaining, so that we can have a last round table with our panel members before we finish. So I'm going to start with the top one. So the one for Ross Tucker. Does the proposed budget include more healthcare centres and focus on healthcare workers in the North Shore? Given the increase in population, there is a need for more hospitals in the area to cope with demand.
So this budget relates to Auckland Council Group. So healthcare and hospitals is outside the remit of local government. That's a central government responsibility. So it's not something that would be considered for a council budget. The role that council does have is kind of working with central government in cooperation in terms of planning for the future, thinking about all the things the city needs. So we might have a bit of a planning and advocacy role, but it's not something that council funds.
Thank you, Ross. Councillor Darby, what investment will there be on the shore in terms of urban regeneration? Is it just focused on the Northcote project and the Takapuna car park project, or will the Council Panuku be investing more broadly?
Yes, thanks for that question. Look, we are focusing on key areas. In the past, we've made a lot of promises to a lot of communities and done things in a very scattered and pretty, I would have to admit, it's sometimes we've underinvested, and then we've had to go back and do tidy up. So we have identified through our strategic plans on the North Shore, there are 3 key areas of investment, and that is Albany, that is a growth area, big growth area, the metro centre of Takapuna, and Northcote. So Northcote, we're working very closely with government because they are the big landholders there. We are also a big landholder, but we've got to do it well, and that takes some capital. So this is all recycled capital for both Northcote and Takapuna. So we're selling a little bit and investing back into those centres generally. If I can dwell on Northcote, it's a really well-planned community that we're creating there. We're not just creating houses and affordable houses for people. Working with government and the private sector, we are basically recreating a whole new town centre in Northcote. And that's beginning to unfold now. We now own the whole of the Northcote town centre. We're in the final stages of buying out ground leases and other business leases. But the truth is, and you've asked a tough question here. Possibly the question is, why aren't we investing elsewhere? We just have to get the best bang for our buck. And public money is really hard to come by, and we're investing it in a more focused way to get the very best results possible. That's the nub of it. Cheers, Carol.
Thanks, Councillor Darby. Councillor Cashmore, one for you. Considering the demand side of the housing and infrastructure equation, why is the council not applying pressure to central government to reduce net immigration into the country, considering such a large proportion of new arrivals end up residing in Auckland?
Yeah, thanks. That's quite a popular question around the city and around the country. Just remember, of the 100,000 people that came into MIQ, our quarantine services, the government's quarantine service over the past 12 months, 95% of them were Kiwis returning home. So we can't say to those 95,000 people, you can't come back to your own country. That's the bottom line to that. There's very little immigration at the moment. In the past, there has been a lot of immigration, and that's helped fuel our economy, but it comes with that infrastructure and housing pressure. There has to be a balance there somehow, and it's a central government challenge, and it's a very real one. There also is a shortage of skill sets in this country. We've found this out with the CRL, the big rail tunnel, and the Central Interceptor. For people to drive those tunnelling machines, the skill set wasn't in this country. And it takes about 2 years to train some people up to do that. So we have a whole raft of issues facing us. It's not just one simple answer to a very complex question, Carol. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know if this one is one for you or one for Ross. Why is the council selling or giving away assets dirt cheap, like ACC building and Orewa Service Centre, when they're in debt? Is that a Ross question to start with?
I'll have a go. So the council is selling surplus assets. So in terms that aren't required in order to help fund the capital program. And in the case of the office buildings, that is all part of a strategy of looking at the buildings that the Auckland Council inherited from legacy councils, and then figuring out, well, what is the office space requirements going forward? And the idea is the strategy is to consolidate a whole range of old buildings into new fit for purpose ones. So that was the reason for selling some older buildings and moving into some newer ones. In terms of that, when we go to dispose of and properties that are no longer needed, we go through a full process, market-based process using Panuku, Council's CCO, with independent boards of directors or property experts, and we go through a process of looking to sell at market value using reliable expert valuers. In the case of the administration building, it was a very old building, requiring lots of work, full of asbestos. And the council, when it looked at that, was facing a heavy demolition bill. It was going to cost money for council to exit rather than get anything for it. So there's some complex issues with some of these buildings, and so council has to rely on experts to go through it. What the council's done recently, just to make sure that there is confidence in terms of getting market value for properties, is it's put in, effectively a bright line test to make sure that we never go and sell properties that are less than 90% of a market of a registered valuation. Registered valuations are never 100% perfect. It always requires expertise and judgment. So there's kind of a test there that that would have to go back and have a whole lot of council scrutiny for anything less than 10% below what an expert thought it might be worth. And then another thing the council's done recently is using our audit and risk committee, which is an independent chair and independent members, to apply a bit of scrutiny to make sure that all of the processes around valuations are all up to standard, and that there's good probity and good assurance around the process.
Thank you, Ross. We are getting close to the end of our webinar, so I think we will take a hold on answering any more questions for now. But if you do still have questions, please put them in the Q&A session, and we will, as I mentioned earlier, we will be publishing a recording of this webinar, plus any questions that we haven't been able to answer during the discussion. We'll post the answers online. So what I want to do before we close is just do a quick round through the panelists to just ask if they've got anything else they'd like to get you to think about before they give their response to this consultation. I'm going to start with Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Carol, and thanks to the presenters, and particularly thanks to our public who are online with us this Sunday evening. It's very good of you to join us. I guess the big challenge we would want to hear from you. So please tell all your family, your friends, the people you commute with, the people you work with. This doesn't need to be a yes or no answer to have your say document online or whichever way you want to do it. What we'd like to do is what do you think? What are your thoughts? What are your reasons? What is your rationale? To give some texture and some colour to your answers. This is a chance for a major reset for Auckland City, and we need to embrace it with both hands, with you alongside us. We appreciate your time and your efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. Councillor Sayers, any final thoughts from you?
Oh, thank you very much, Carol. Perhaps just reinforcing my earlier comments around if the listeners do not fully support every aspect of this budget, they need to mark that down in question number 1 in terms of the feedback, and to tell us why. That's just so critical. In Rodney, it could be around the rural rating areas planned around Kimu. It could be around the road sealing budgets and unsealed road improvement programs. Just tell us why you don't fully support the figures and direction inside the budget, because that's very helpful for us when we have to go and represent your voice around the governing body table. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. Councillor Walker, any final thoughts?
I'd just like to thank people for participating in the webinar. I think webinars are quite useful. They put councillors on the spot. It'd be good to get some submissions from people advocating that we could adopt this approach with various government ministers for Auckland, because that's really where we need to have more assistance, frankly, because it's the government that will largely be resolving many of our issues. So I just put that out there. Yes, submissions to us are fine, but there's a bigger picture here that we're part of.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Any last thoughts from you, Councillor Watson?
Yes, thank you. I think it was a good question from Ken there at the end, certainly in terms of the return on the asset sales in respect of Orewa council offices. They went for virtually half the CV. So I appreciate the fact that there's concern over that type of sales process in light of the fact that half the complex down there was less than 10 years old. But in terms of getting people to think overall, I think the officers referred to, have they struck the right balance here? And that balance is between what is being proposed, which is a fairly significant increase in the capital spend budget from 26 billion from a couple of years ago to 31 billion, whether that's matched by people's capacity to pay in terms of the rate increase that's proposed, along with the other payments that people currently make in terms of the regional fuel tax, in terms of the water care charges that are going to be going up at an average of 8%. So we really want to know whether people think that that's a reasonable balance, and if not, to make that clear and to tell us why, because we really want to be guided by what our community is saying. Thanks, Carol.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for attending. I guess just encourage people to submit, really. And the fact is, even though we've had this massive revenue drop due to COVID, if you look back 5 to 6 years ago, we were only investing $1.5 billion a year in infrastructure, and this year we're on track to spend about 2.9 billion. So even though we're under huge pressure, we're still investing more than double in capital, and that's in the water, community, parks, transport spaces than we were just 5 or 6 years ago. So it's significant, it's costly. Everyone wants everything now, and it's pretty difficult to do that. We do listen to the feedback. Obviously, it's impossible to get what everyone wants or the way that everyone supports or doesn't support the budget, but it's so important that we get a wide range of views from right across the city. So thanks very much for tuning in. And just for Michael, if you could email me and I can have a look at your, but I can't work out exactly where in Hillcrest you are from the messages, and I know there are other opportunities there, and we have increased bus services the last couple of years there, so happy to help.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. And the last but not least, Councillor Darby.
Oh, look, thank you. And look, thanks to everybody who came on tonight. I know there's just a small team of us, but that's important. And look, we are looking for your really constructive feedback and blunt and honest feedback we do need. Look, I think, we often plow on with thinking about what we do need to spend our money on, but sometimes we don't stop and say, well, actually, there's some areas which I think you need to stop spending. Council, as our new chief executive reminded us recently, invariably doesn't stop things. It doesn't look at things and monitor projects and programs and go, well, that's not value for money anymore. The need or the desire for using that facility has gone away. And we're reluctant to pull the plug, even when usage goes down. So, what is there that maybe we should stop doing? Does this budget face the future in a really big, bold way? Does it face that COVID world that we're going to be living in for a while? Does it face the climate change world that we're going to be living in for a very long time? Does it represent the needs of our young people? They're going to be living what this budget delivers the longest. So if we put some weight on our young people, what does this budget look like for them? Should we sell additional assets? We own about $2 billion worth of airport shares. Should we or shouldn't we look at maybe selling down 300, 400, 500 million of that at this time? should we stop doing some big ticket transport projects in favour of more public transport and more walking and cycling and more tactical urbanism in neighbourhoods, that sort of thing? You know, we're a city of 1.7 million now. We're New Zealand's only international city. We are going to grow. We're a really attractive place to live. Auckland is a cool city, and it is going to grow, and these pressures are going to grow with its growth. So how do we best spend that public money? Tell us. Nothing's fait accompli here. We need to land this at the end of June after we've carefully analysed all your good feedback, and thank you for it.
So thank you so much to all of our panelists tonight. I really appreciate the tricky questions you've had to deal with from the audience, and it's been some fantastic questions just to help people build people's understanding of this consultation and the issues that you're facing. I want to thank our staff, the subject matter experts who joined us tonight to provide their expertise, and I want to also thank the consultation team who've been providing support in the background to run tonight's webinar. So thank you all again for coming. We hope you found this interesting and it's helped you build your understanding of the consultation. Oh, Councillor Fletcher, did you want to make a quick comment before we wrap up?
I wanted to say that I don't think there's predetermination here. It's International Women's Day tomorrow. Women have fought very hard to be heard over the years. We've heard a lot of men tonight, but it's been really good having you doing such a fabulous job, Carol, moderating this. But I do want to hear from the public. You know, we have to make, as Councillor Darby has said, we have to make some huge decisions and hard decisions. I put less weighting on this being the COVID budget. I think it's coming to grips with things that we should have done a long time ago in terms of renewals. So to all the women out there who might be listening tonight, please make sure that you do submit. And as others have said, you don't have to submit on everything, just submit on the things that you think are the priorities to give us the amenity for growing into the future. Thanks.
So thank you. So just to remind you that submissions close on the 22nd of March at 12 noon. Go to akhaveyoursay.nz to find out all of the information on this consultation and to give us your feedback. We look forward to hearing your views. Thank you very much. Good night.